Hey, shalom, shalom, shalom lakam, which is peace unto you all. Hi, Rab Tawab La Atham Zahikam Yawaman Rchagadol Charlotte, which is good evening. This is your brother Yawam from the GMS camp in Charlotte. Nachamatam Kayah Malakatha Shemayim Kwarab. Repent ye for the kingdom of heaven is at hand. Call Layim La Allah Banaw Yahweh Bahasham Yahweh Shai Bahasham Rucha Kodashwa Mashana Laza Kwanim Nawa Wamalakim Sharucha Gadol, which is all praises to our Father Yahweh, which means he exists. Bahasham, in the name Yahweh Shai, delivers in double honors to the elders and apostles of Great Millstone. This is a quick AI overview, and it says store closures in Charlotte, North Carolina are primarily driven by rising operational costs, labor, food, rent, high inflation affecting consumer spending, and a shift toward e-commerce. All right. And ultimately, just going around in the city, in Charlotte, and pretty much, seeing a lot of these places and stores and stuff like that, closing down. A lot of them are, applying for like bankruptcy and things of that nature, you see, because they can't keep up with the things as listed right here. It says labor, all right? They got to pay for, they got to pay their employees, all right? They got to pay for food, all right? And they also got to pay for rent, all right? In which all of these things are increasing due to hyperinflation. But it says high inflation affecting consumer spending and a shift toward e-commerce, in which the inflation is affecting the consumer spending, you see, because a lot of people don't have the funding like that. They don't have any jobs. All right, it says in a shift toward e-commerce, everything is going to digital. So it says significant factors also include declining foot traffic, safety concerns in specific areas like North Lake Mall, post-pandemic staffing shortages, and a strategic reduction of footprints by national retailers. So everything is pretty much going to where it's digital. All right, that's where you have like Amazon, Temu, and pretty much just different apps and websites to where people can pretty much purchase things online. Because everything is pretty much switching over to digital. But it says economic pressures and inflation, high inflation and rising costs. Rent, food, labor are forcing many restaurants and retailers, such as those mentioned in recent reports, to close due to diminished profit margins. It says shift consumer habits, e-commerce. It says North Lake Mall specifics. The mall has faced high-profile safety concerns, including multiple shootings and the departure of anchor tenants like Apple, which has hurt overall traffic and viability. It says strategic closures and bankruptcies. Major chains such as Express, Family Dollar, and CVS are closing hundreds of locations nationally as part of restructuring plans, which impacts local Charlotte sites. It says operational challenges. Many businesses in the area are struggling with staffing shortages and reduced consumer traffic, leading to earlier operating hours and eventual closures. So pretty much everyone is feeling the squeeze. So let's get a couple precepts. This is Qahalat Ecclesiastes chapter, chapter 12. All right, and we'll get verse 1. It says, remember now thy creator in the days of thy youth, in which, there were youth goes into, the select time, in which ultimately, the select time is, when we're a young man. All right, and young man, all right, the age of 12, all right, but in these times, all right, the select time is when we first hear this word. So that's a select time to ultimately remember the Lord, Yahweh Bahasham, Yahweh Shai. So it says, while the evil days come not, nor the years draw nigh, when thou shalt say, I have no pleasure in them. So before the evil times come, because we're in those evil times, and we're just going to continue to increase. It says, while the sun, reading it back, verse 1, remember now thy creator in the days of thy youth, while the evil days come not, nor the years draw not, when thou shalt say, I have no pleasure in them. You see, because before the evil days, all right, this word is readily accessible. All right, but it's going to come a point in time to where, this word isn't going to be readily accessible. All right, Amos, the 8th chapter. All right, the famine of the word, so it's imperative to get this word, while it's hot, because this truth is time sensitive. Verse 2, it says, while the sun or the light or the moon or the stars be not darkened, nor the clouds return after the rain, in the days when the keepers of the house shall tremble, in which the keepers of the house, that represents the economists, all right, because the economy or economists, both of those words have a relation to the keepers of the house, all right. So the economy, all right, also shows the state of the people, all right, and being that it said, reduce consumer spending, all right, that means that the state of the people is not looking too good, you see. So that's why the keepers of the house are trembling, you see, because what keeps a country And America's a corporation, but what keeps a corporation going, or what keeps a business going, is ultimately consuming. You see, so nobody is consuming. You see, because the jobs are being cut. All right, Isaiah the 19th chapter, but it says, "In the day when the keepers of the house shall tremble, and the strong men shall bow themselves, and the grinders cease because they are few, and those that look out the windows be darkened." All right, so ultimately the grinding is ceasing. All right, the grinders are ceasing, because ultimately it's job shortages, it's job cuts. All right, hundreds of thousands of jobs are being cut. You see, so we're in a time to where it's hyperinflation, and then also people are losing jobs. People are losing jobs. But reading it again, it says, "In the day when the keepers of the house shall tremble, and the strong men shall bow themselves, and the grinders cease because they are few, and those that look out of the windows be darkened." You see, because there's no hope for this place. All right, everybody's shutting down these stores. All right, when you look at the on the horizon of America, Babylon the Great. All right, it's no hope for this place. All right, it's no revamping, it's no revising, it's no building back better. All right, this place is going down. All right, CTD circling the drain. So let's also get this. Let's get Isaiah the 19th chapter, and we'll get verse 15, and it says, "Neither shall there be any work for Egypt, which the head or tail, branch or what rush may do." All right. Again, it says, "Neither shall there be any work for Egypt, which the head or tail, branch or rush may do." You see, because ultimately it's nothing, to be able to. A couple years ago, they ultimately made something called a stimulus package. All right. And then they dropped, a couple of those, and that was supposed to stimulate the economy. All right. But it didn't stimulate the economy. It just made it to where they was printing excess money. All right. And it was just pretty much devaluing the dollar. All right, and that's pretty much where this regime pretty much is pushing towards now, to where they're devaluing the dollar. All right, with this war. All right, but pretty much the point in verse 15, it's nothing that they can do to ultimately stimulate any type of consumer spending. All right, in this place. All right, this place was never meant, all right, to continue on. America, Babylon the Great was just a giant experiment, in which the experiment, all right, went terribly wrong. So continuing on, let's also get this. Let's get Amos chapter 8. All right, and we'll get verse 11. It says, "Behold, the days come, saith the Lord power, that I will send a famine in the land, not a famine of bread nor a thirst for water, but of hearing the words of the Lord." All right, that's why I said to remember now thy creator in the days of thy youth. You see, because it's going to come a point in time to where, this word, all right, ultimately isn't going to be readily accessible, as it is right now. All right, which they're slowly but surely, when I say they, I'm talking about Esau, Edom, the so-called white man. You see, because this word poses a threat, to his rulership. You see, so he has to do things such as censoring. All right, which that goes into the famine of the word. That's why it says, "Behold, the days come, saith the Lord power," in which the famine of the word is coming from the Lord, Yahweh Bahasham, Yahweh Shai. It's just that he's using Esau, Edom as a tool, all right, to push forth the censorship. But it says that I will send a famine in the land, not a famine of bread nor a thirst for water, but of hearing the words of the Lord. They shall wander from sea to sea, and from the north even to the east. They shall run to and fro to seek the word of the Lord, and shall not find it. All right, and ultimately, that's how it's going to be, you see, because people are going to be wanting answers. All right, people want answers now, you see, but it's going to be a dire need for answers in these days to come. All right, but they're not going to get the answers that they're looking for. All right, so let's get another one. This is Psalm chapter 32 and verse 6, and it says, "For this shall everyone that is godly pray unto thee in a time when thou mayest be found. Surely in the floods of great waters they shall not come nigh unto him." All right, reading it again. "For this shall everyone that is godly pray unto thee in a time when thou mayest be found." All right, so it's very imperative, if this word resonates with your spirit, all right, to, repent. You see, because this truth, again, it is time sensitive. It says, "Surely in the floods of great waters they shall not come nigh unto him." So when Esau, Edom, is coming down, with, heavy persecution, all right, coming down, with that great wrath, all right, coming in like a flood, all right, the word isn't going to be, out as it is, currently. All right, so that's why it's imperative, to get this truth while it's hot, This is Amos chapter 5 and verse 13. And it says, "Therefore the prudent shall keep silence in that time, for it is an evil time." So the precepts, all right, this truth, all right, this word is not going to be mass produced or mass It's not going to be flowing, it's not going to be like an overflowing river. All right, it's going to be, it's going to go out to those that it's meant for, because you do got, those that's going to come in at the last minute. All right, but it's not going to be, again, it's not going to be readily accessible. It's not going to be like you can go on YouTube, all right, and type in something that you want to see, all right, and, it pops up. All right, for those that's of the elect, yeah, that is meant to, to get the word. All right, the Lord's going to make a way for them to get the word, you see, but this truth isn't going to be, all right, as accessible as it is currently. All right, because it's going to be an evil time. All right, it's not going to be, again, this truth ultimately, it poses a threat to Esau Edom's society. All right, so he has to ultimately push forth. All right, of course, it's the hand of the Lord, using Esau as the tool with that censorship. All right, so I'm gonna get one more and that'll be it. But this is let me see. This is Amos chapter 5, and we'll get verse 10. And it says, they hate him that rebuketh in the gate, and they abhor him that speaketh uprightly. All right, so ultimately, we're bringing out information, all right, through the Spirit, about this man's kingdom. All right, we're bringing out information, all right, as to his next plans. All right, we're bringing out information about his past. You see, so that's why ultimately, that they hate the prophets. All right, those that ultimately, rebuke them and correct them. You see, it says, and they abhor him that speaketh uprightly. So ultimately, Esau Edom abhors the prophets. All right, so he's going to push forth. He's going to use what that right hand of falsehood. He's going to use that to his benefit. All right, and we understand that that right hand of falsehood goes into his propaganda. All right, so ultimately, in the time of the persecution, it's not going to be. It wouldn't be wise, to it wouldn't be wise, as we got in Amos the 5th chapter and the 13th verse, to be out on the highways and byways, because it's going to be a bad time. It's going to be an evil time. Eve goes into a time, ill goes into bad. You see, so the Lord is ultimately going to pull his man off of the highways and byways, and into protection. All right, pretty much the point. In this video, I just wanted to go into some of the perils that's coming upon the planet Earth. All right, America, Babylon the Great, is closing up shop. The stores are closing down. People don't have jobs. All right. We're coming up into the time of the famine of the word, the persecution. All right. So again, if this word resonates with your spirit, it's time to pray and repent, and lock in, but Adoran Tazaza Banayapa. Lord's will, that was a beautiful edification through the spirit. Wa Adoran Tazaza Atam Yash Laila Tawab. Lord's will, you have a good night. Wash